Mondstadt, Salvandagnir, Dainsleif, Irminsul, the Chasm, and Khaenri'ah. What do these things all have in common? Sure, we could simply say these bad boys can fit so many ancient mysteries in them, and yes, that is true. But there is one specific thread that brings us into some real-world mythology that I'm absolutely thrilled to dive into with you all. I studied it in college, and it's my cringe special interest, you see, and that thing is Old Norse history and mythology. First, a very not subtle side note. I take serious umbrage with people appropriating Norse symbols and history to prop up their imaginary racially pure ethno-state fantasies and hate. So I just want to be clear that I'm very vehemently not commiserating with any of these types by enjoying Norse history. Odin is the All-Father, not the select few father. Begone, woe be upon ye, perish, etc. I'm also stopping here to give my big, gigantic spoiler warning up to and including the Archon Quest of 3.3, as well as general exploration spoilers if that matters to you. This is, aside from the historical and name etymology I'm dropping, largely a theory, so please don't take it as canon fact. With that out of the way, Genshin Impact makes use of a ton of different real-world myths, legends, and historical tales. This is something most of us know or are at least aware of, but the regions are mostly rather homogeneous. In Liyue, you can expect the myths and legends taken from to be of Chinese origin. In Inazuma, everything, and I mean everything, is Japanese. In Sumeru, there's a wider berth, but the stories are generally from the Middle East and Southern Asia. This influence is seen even in the character and NPC names of the region. Mondstadt, too, has a general sphere of influence. Generic European might be the best way of describing it, and so it's easy to think nothing of the Norse names and references scattered throughout the German, occasionally French or English, I'm looking at you, Venti's outfit, and, wait. Except that Old Norse is used very specifically for another nation, one dangled in front of our noses for the entirety of our hero's journey, Khaenri'ah. I'm Ganymede, and I'm going to guide you through the many frayed threads of Khaenri'ah's etymology, as well as how it connects to other nations in the world of Teyvat, and what we can glean from those connections. Okay, I know I talk about Dragonspine here a lot. You might almost assume my favorite playable character is associated with it or something. But I'm once again going to direct your attention to the civilization of Salvandagnir. We're taking a somewhat different tack here this time, though, and focusing mostly on names and their origins. The name Salvandagnir, while being more or less of Norse origin, is kind of a word salad. Sal is most likely a translated romanization of Sar, spelled S-A-L-R, which means hall or room. Vindagnir is an amalgamation of likely 3 separate words conjugated into a weird compound. Vinde is wind, Agnir is husk or shell, and Agnir is ownership. So we can more or less read Salvandagnir as the Hall of the Wind's Husk, or maybe a more derivative poetic reading would be Empty Halls of the Wind. We know that Dragonspine is technically considered part of Mondstadt by default, even sporting its own statue of Venti near the place where the princess's famous prophetic murals are painted, in the old palace ruins. This is interesting on its own, as the civilization here almost definitely predates Mondstadt and Venti's ascension. I know the statues of the Seven are in-game plot devices, but I can't help but ask earnestly, who put that statue of Venti there? Could it perhaps be the oldest statue of the Seven out of the bunch in Mondstadt? Okay, that's a tangent. Anyway, it's still in the Land of the Wind, so the name fits well enough. I find the origin of the name Salvandagnir interesting. While it could be argued that perhaps the ancient dragon-spine-dwelling civilization did not name itself, I always felt that the ancient domain there being called Peak of Vindagnir is enough to tell us that yes, that was the place's name before Mondstadt started calling it Dragonspine. Even that seems a bit odd, though 500 years give or take is long enough time for a moniker to become colloquial, I suppose. I digress. We also know that this ancient civilization is older than Khaenri'ah, with the scribe Ukko's account mentioning what was the founding of that nation only just occurring as theirs crumbled. Why this is important is the fact that Salvandagnir is our first, perhaps most ancient encounter with the use of Old Norse etymology in Teyvat. This leads me to believe that the nation of Khaenri'ah was in part largely founded by refugees who had fled the Celestial Nail's eternal winter on the mountain of Dragonspine. I don't think that's a large leap to make at all, when Genshin Impact is so good at keeping the local flavor and cultural significance of each region rather homogeneous, at least to the standard they set for each area. The only places where we see things get mixed around in a blender, sometimes to the point of absurdity, are in Enkanomiya and Mondstadt itself. Maybe a little in Sumeru because they're trying to smush and squash so many different cultures into one area, but that one is unintentional in my opinion. So that leads me to believe that if Khaenri'ah has mostly, if not purely, Old Norse naming conventions, that the language and culture of Salvandagnir had to play a part in its foundational culture. And who else would be more motivated to completely shirk free of the gods' control than the survivors of a nation who seem to have done everything right up to a point and still been wiped from the face of the earth? Another fascinating little bit of lore that I remember being decoded by dedicated lorehounds on the Genshin Impact subreddit in real time is the fact that there are numerous ruin guards located in Dragonspine still transmitting a strange numeric code cipher. Now, of course we know that that does not necessarily mean that this place was linked to Khaenri'ah, as the ruin machines spread throughout the world over the centuries after the 500-year-old calamity. But I find it interesting that many of them are buried beneath the snow, inactive, save for the transmission they continue to repeat. Translated, the cipher reads, "For the nation, we can't forgo the skyborn power, but we failed." Just as we found the Abyss Order trying to do, well, something to the celestial nail in the chasm, it seems that perhaps the people of Khaenri'ah tried to send a force up the mountain to get to the Skyfrost Nail, and that mission failed. Perhaps, knowing that this object contained the power of the gods as it had been used to scour their original homeland from existence, the descendants of the survivors of Salvandagnir saw their chance to take the power that had destroyed their forebears' homeland and turn it on the gods in their war against them. I also put forth the theory that it was their princess's power of prophecy, somehow tapping into the now familiar forbidden knowledge by witnessing events that happened during and after the cataclysm in Khaenri'ah that brought the heavenly wrath down upon them. Further proof that the Old Norse etymology as it appears in the world of Genshin Impact begins with the Salvandagnir civilization is the name Imenlaka. During the days following Dragonspine's release, all manner of people scrambled to dig into the meanings of the few names that were revealed. Imenlaka was surprisingly stubborn, with some eventually even dismissing it as a nonsense word. But I happen to remember that it was familiar from somewhere, and harkened back to a very dry text I'd studied in passing. Imenlaka means leak of battle. Yes, that leak, the spinning one. This is a little silly sounding, but the Norse were extremely fond of using just about any straight, stick-like object as a euphemism to mean, well, sword. Everything can be a sword in Old Norse if you try hard enough. This particular mention of the word comes from The Sword in Anglo-Saxon England, its Archaeology and Literature by Hilda Roderick Ellis Davidson, in a little tiny footnote about kennings. Kennings being more or less the act of using euphemisms rather than naming a thing directly, and this practice eventually evolved into what we simply know as giving nicknames in the present day. I have more dusty, so old they had to be scanned in rather than simply typed texts on the Norse Imenlaka and the likely related Imenloks with an S, which was the sword of the god Ur, but while fascinating on their own, I feel they'd just be superfluous here. The point I'm trying to make is that I believe much of Khaenri'ah's culture and even its language came from Salvandagnir, and as it changed over the years, began to give us names like Dainsleif, Alberich, and Halfdan. Which, of course, brings me to the man, the myth, the legend himself, Dainsleif of the many kennings. He's called the Bow Keeper, as well as the Twilight Sword, and his name is also ripped directly from the pages of Norse myth. Dainsleif, translated as Dane's Legacy, is King Hogni's sword according to Snorri Sturluson's account of the battle known as the Hjaldingavig. When Hedin offers Hogni compensation for the abduction of his daughter, Hogni replies, "Thou hast made this offer over late. If thou wouldst make peace, for now I have drawn Dainsleif, which the dwarves made, and which must cause a man's death every time it is bared, nor ever fails in its stroke. Moreover, the wound heals not if one be scratched with it." Dainsleif was forged by the dwarves, and the sword was cursed with insatiable bloodlust and could not be sheathed once drawn until it had killed a man. Any wound caused by the sword would never be able to heal. The actual etymology of Dainsleif, directly translated as I said before, is Legacy of Dane. This is what we know about Dain himself. Dain is the leader of the elves in the world of Alfheim. His name is mentioned in the Havamal as well, alongside Odin and Dvalin. Odin for Aesir, and Dain for the elves, Dvalin for the dwarves, Asvid for the giants. I myself carve some. Havamal 143 from Poetic Edda. The act of carving referred to mastering the magic of the runes. Here we find yet another familiar name from Mondstadt, Dvalin, our favorite stardust-covered fluffy teal dragon. In Norse myth, he's the king of the dwarves rather than an anime dragon. However, this also suggests that the names in Genshin Impact that come from Old Norse are extremely old. Just as any Greco-Roman names bring us back to the unified civilization that existed before the current order of the world brought about by the second who came. At this point, I'm more or less assuming that names from the time of the unified civilization came in these two flavors. The southeast part of the world favoring Greco-Roman, while the northern part of the world, mostly Mondstadt and perhaps what would one day be Snezhnaya, favoring the Old Norse language. This theory does have one hole in it, in the fact that Tartaglia's given name, Ajax, is Greco-Roman and was given to him by his father as an homage to an ancient hero. Of course, this could mean that both languages flowed freely between the lands of that old unified civilization, or simply confirm that I'm slightly wrong here and Greek was the language of the day for that entire time period. Anyway, these connections also lead us back to a pretty important one. Irminsul, which is more or less depicted with a similar styling to that of Yggdrasil in Teyvat, the world tree from Norse myth. In the stories, Yggdrasil is the tree that upholds the whole universe, its branches spreading into the cosmos and its roots into the abyss below. With multiple in-game texts giving Irminsul the same mythological treatment, I'd say it's safe to assume that Irminsul is our Yggdrasil. Odin, king of the gods, once hung himself upside down on Yggdrasil in a symbolic act of self-sacrifice. Through this, he gained power over magic and the ability to use the runes that were both the Old Norse writing system and powerful magic symbols. These symbols could be used to divine the future, cast curses, create magical bind runes by combining them into unique symbols by overlaying and combining them, and had countless other cultural and occult purposes to the peoples that used them. Bringing this back to Khaenri'ah, I'd say it's a rather important bit of information and maybe a nod to the abyssal language we see throughout the game. Another tale of Odin tells us of how he lost his eye. It too was sacrificed in exchange for the wisdom of Mimir's well. By plucking out his own eye and leaving it at the bottom of the well's magical waters, he gained the ability to see all of the past, present, and future, becoming for all intents and purposes omniscient. That little snippet of the Havamal from before mentions Dain and Dvalin alongside Odin, who I believe is the basis for King Irmin of Khaenri'ah, the very same man depicted in the statuettes dropped by the knights in the chasm. One of Odin's many names is Irmin, meaning Cosmos or the Mighty One, but is also very close to Irmin in actual Norse pronunciation. This may not be a connection at all aside from similar sounds, and I don't know the direct Chinese translation of the king's name off the top of my head, but with his effigy being an obvious Odin reference, the sharing of one of his names does not seem like a big stretch. To clarify, the word Irminsul itself is the Norse word for a large figure, totem, or idol carved from the whole trunk of a tree, among which are some of the very oldest depictions of gods ever found in the world, usually preserved at the bottom of peat bogs. Anyway, back on track. We learned the King of Khaenri'ah's name in a limited time event based around Diluc called Hidden Strife, through a hidden stash of letters that Kaya had saved over the years. The text reads as follows. Remember always that it was the Alberic clan, who did not have royal blood, who stepped in as regents when the strength of the one-eyed king Irmin failed. Though we could not restore Khaenri'ah to life, we of the Alberic clan should lead lives as those who blaze like fire rather than those who wallow in the embers. Kaya's clan name, Alberic, means ruler of supernatural beings, and it is the name of a mythological figure featured prominently in Norse mythology, such as the Nibelungenlied, Ortnit, and Thiedrich saga. He also appears in the famous Richard Wagner opera cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, which is the first exposure to Norse myth that most people experience through its many adaptations and the myriad stories it has influenced, though it was written much later than the original myths. Interestingly enough, This same group of myths and the opera cycle written about them heavily inspired Tolkien's Lord of the Rings saga, and in Wagner's epic, Alberic is the antagonist who forges a magical ring of gold stolen from the Rhine Maidens, or originally Rhine Daughters. I'd say it is highly likely that the tale of the alchemist Gold, also called Rhine Daughter by Albedo, is inspired at least in part by this opera. There are countless Nibelungen references scattered about Mondstadt and what Khaenri'ah lore we have thus far. Even the blacksmith in Mondstadt, Wagner, is a wink and nod to this tale. So, even Albedo's creator, the alchemist Gold, who is often cited as being almost wholly responsible for the calamity of 500 years ago, is tied to this Norse etymology, the root of all things Khaenri'ah. The one thing I've argued for years now is that these three things, the civilization of Salvandagnir, Mondstadt, and Khaenri'ah, are inextricably linked. The true location of Khaenri'ah has been a source of heated debate for ages, and one I see crop up again and again on Reddit and in comment sections. But I think the easiest, clearest answer is usually the right one. In the Archon Quest interlude, where we meet and travel with Dainsleif for the second time, we are led to Stormterror's lair and come into contact with a dandelion that the traveler senses something familiar about. Interacting with it grants us a vision of the fall of Khaenri'ah, showing the traveler's siblings standing in the same place 500 years prior while bearing witness to its destruction. While Khaenri'ah was massive and spanned nearly every corner of Teyvat, it had to have its own capital, and likely more than a few areas that were not entirely underground. We can see this in some of the visible ruins as well. I don't think it'd be odd at all to deduct that Khaenri'ah's capital city was just beyond the map border of Stormterror's lair, towards the northwest. We only have some placeholder mountains and water to look at in a deep, low-lying valley now, but we know there was something more there simply by looking at what the story has shown us. Assuming this to be true, we know that the remnants of Old Mondstadt are right there on the border of what would become Khaenri'ah. With so many Old Norse names among the population of Mondstadt mixed in with the purely Germanic or generic European ones, I feel like this is clear thematic storytelling. In other regions, outlanders from other areas of Teyvat are usually identified almost entirely due to their naming convention, at least at first. Why should the same not hold true for Mondstadt? And it also opens up the question, why would Kaya's father choose Mondstadt over any other nation to specifically leave Kaya behind in if it didn't have some significance to him and to Khaenri'ah as a whole? I think the answer is the simple one, that the civilizations of Old Mondstadt and Salvandagnir hold the very building blocks of the origins of Khaenri'ah. And where is the Dawn Winery located? In the literal foothills of Dragonspine. I've mentioned before that it's strange that Salvandagnir is not mentioned by name in any texts in Mondstadt, and I wonder if that is in part because whatever survivors there were went not to Mondstadt, which likely would have been only a fledgling nation recovering from their escape from Decarabian's power at the time, but to this new nation without gods that their royal scribe had taken note of. Perhaps they thought to settle somewhere that they could have their own homeland, but instead found their hopes for the future and a use for their anger at Celestia to drive them to join with these other people. This leads me back to my big Khaenri'ah theory. In the Genshin Impact theory crafting world, theories about Khaenri'ah are a dime a dozen, and I doubt mine's really any different, but all of this research and my own understanding of storytelling leads me to one big theory that has many different possible iterations and directions. Through environmental storytelling, we've been shown what Khaenri'ah's ruins look like. They have specific tells that separate them from the local cultures. For instance, the difference between Liyue's indigenous ruins and Khaenri'ah's ruins among them are pretty obvious. The only place we don't see a major differentiation between the culture's main ruins of its own and the ones that were built by Khaenri'ah is Mondstadt. The only exception here is Stormterror's lair, which has its own motif of vines carved into many of the support pillars. Everything else scattered around Mondstadt is basic Khaenri'ah style. We can even easily identify the ruins of the unified civilization that came before Khaenri'ah and was the dominating social structure of their time, and have confirmed that that civilization spanned at least as far as Inazuma through Enkanomiya to the southwestern part of Liyue, as evidenced by the ruins in the chasm that use all the same assets. So here we have unified civilization architecture, Liyuean architecture, mostly of the Dunyu civilization from the chasm. Interestingly enough, Inazuma has very little prehistory architecture of its own that is not Enkanomian or Khaenri'ah. I remember an NPC commenting that their people care little for preservation of the past and instead focus on living in the moment, but I need a source for that. Then we have Sumeru's extremely iconic architecture versus the desert civilizations and its Khaenri'ah ruins. Now, this brings me to Sumeru itself and another interesting new addition, the term Dahri. Coming to Sumeru, we get our first real taste of a colloquial word for Khaenri'ah that isn't just Khaenri'ah, or something related to the calamity they created, or the abyss. The ruins of Dahri are a deep underground labyrinth that connects an honestly vast swath of land, with multiple entrances and exits. Then, in the desert area, there's the absolutely massive and honestly intimidating, even without the colossal ruin guard, Valley of Dahri. There, inside the Colossus and its jungle counterpart at Devtanaka Mountain, we find the notes and missives of the Khaenri'ah soldiers that were sent there for some unknown purpose, but ended up assailed by abyssal monsters. Those notes give us another small hint at Khaenri'ah and Mondstadt's linguistic connections in the names of several personnel and the name of the detachment of knights themselves, the Khaenri'ah. Also of note are the names of these knights, Inghilda, Hadura, Hildrick, and Anfortas. Aside from Hadura, these names are all Germanic in origin. Hadura is possibly another spelling of Hadura with an H, and is both a Hindi and Urdu name, though it's rather rare and there's very little information on its meaning to be found. This, for me, further corroborates my own overall Khaenri'ah theory. I believe that while we know Khaenri'ah had a king and regions and likely a capital city, that the reason Khaenri'ah was so powerful and so widespread was due to the fact of what they represented. Now, I'm going to go back a few steps and bring back the word that the people of Sumeru used for Khaenri'ah in ancient times, Dahri. This word comes from Middle Persian literature and the Islamic period. Dahri comes from the root word dar, time and eternity. It's a theological term referring either to an atheist or to an adherent of the doctrine that the universe had no beginning in time. This word appears primarily in Middle Persian literature alongside many other words used for describing and naming skeptics, heretics, and general deniers of the validity of religious doctrine, with many texts going so far as to call them on the side of the devils. In some colloquial usages, it has come to mean ignoble, though its true, purest meaning really is simply one who denies the religious dogma of the day and does not follow it. Zoroastrians wrote on this sect of people, calling them materialists. The Iranian materialists and atheists dissociated themselves from the naturalistic infinite time, the temporal dar, as the primal principle of the cosmos, and simply denied God, the creation, and religion in general. These descriptions certainly sound like they line up with the prime foundations of what Khaenri'ah was described to stand for. Now, back to the Khaenri'ah, whose full story I will leave up to you to discover, made up of mostly Germanic names with one Hindi or Urdu one, none of these being specifically Old Norse. My belief is that Khaenri'ah was, in its prime, more of an ideal than a singular ethno-state. Sure, there was King Ermin and the royal knights like Dainsleif, but I think back to the people who survived the tragedy of Salvandagnir. Where would they have gone? What would they have done? Could they have sworn off all allegiance to Celestia in response to what was done to their civilization, even going so far as to seek vengeance against the heavens themselves? And I don't think it was just them. The people of the Dunyu ruins suddenly left their homeland, closing their underground civilization to the outside world and abandoning it after a calamity. There are extensive Khaenri'ah ruins on Surumi Island. Surely, after witnessing the terrible calamity wrought by the heavens, some of those people too fled or sought some kind of retribution for the horrors they'd witnessed. King Deshret's mighty civilization split and fractured after his first encounter with forbidden knowledge. Where might some of them have turned if not to self-identify as Dahri and join the fight against those who had barred certain kinds of knowledge? And in Sumeru, after witnessing what Celestia does when forbidden knowledge is attained, as even King Deshret himself mentioned Celestia's spikes of purity used to pierce the earth's crust wherever their laws were overstepped, would not some people seek to revolt against the heavens? And then I think about Dainsleif saying that Khaenri'ah was once the pride of humankind. Recently, some doubt has been cast onto the idea of whether Khaenri'ah was truly a secular nation or not, due to the text of the statuettes its knights drop in the chasm, suggesting that the figure carved onto them is a holy figure. King Ermin, the one-eyed king of Khaenri'ah, matches that description, surely, but it also brings into question just how valid Khaenri'ah's claims of being godless really are. But I also have a feeling that that doesn't matter much to anyone but that inner circle of knights who served the king directly and what would be considered the Khaenri'ah upper echelon, with people joining their cause from all over. Perhaps not only this veneration of King Irmin existed, but their own colloquial beliefs in their gods, mostly slain by Celestia, were kept close to their chests. I think calling Khaenri'ah a nation without a god could be better understood by the idea of modern governments which choose not to have any state-sanctioned religion, therefore favoring none of them. Well, at least that's the idea, right? That's much harder to actually implement in real life. In a time when Celestia's nails wrought horror and genocide, many places were rendered uninhabitable as their populaces were punished and scattered, like the biblical story of the Tower of Babel reenacted over and over. While some of these people surely just became the local populations we know today, just as many might have fled for Khaenri'ah and a promise of a nation unbeholden to Celestia's laws. This, I think, is why we have proof now of colloquial names for Khaenri'ah and their ideals, and local names appearing next to their Germanic and Norse comrades in arms. Khaenri'ah, to me, seems to have sought to mirror the glory of the now forgotten unified civilization from the time of the primordial one and its shades, only to once more be struck down by the very gods that they and their people had turned their backs on. Human mythology is full of tales of humans venturing to defy the gods and being punished for their hubris. I think of Dainsleif's dialogue in the chapter preview trailer often and wonder what kind of tale the writers hope to present. One where the divine is just in their punishment, or one where we humans have our humanity, and finally find the power to break free from the chains of fate that bind us. For now, only time will tell which direction the story of Teyvat will head in. In the end, will Khaenri'ah and the nation that clearly means to follow in their footsteps and succeed where they failed, Khaenri'ah, prove to be the righteous ones? Or will the writers remind us that to try to overstep into the realm of the divine uninvited is to destroy ourselves? Which philosophy will win out? The only way to find out is to keep soldiering on. Maybe our answers will come in our next stop, Fontaine, where we interrogate the very meaning of the word justice. I hope it's a journey that we continue to take together. This is Ganymede of the Hexen Zirkel, signing off.